Hello everyone. Today we'll discuss other ways also to send the configuration to the application deployed using Kubernetes. The first example we'll cover is the if you get the contents from a file, and at very high level, what this means is we'll have a file which will have the configurations or properties. And using Kubernetes, we will have the configuration of properties inside this file created as environment variable, and our application will be able to take those environment variables and as environment variables and use that as configurations. So we'll go step by step. If you have not deleted your pods, delete those. Let me check if I have any pod running. kubectl get pod. I think I have. I was trying something. Okay, so let me try to delete this. kubectl delete pod slash this, and this. And let me see if the ports can get started. Yeah, these are controlled by stateful sets. I will delete those stateful sets later. So let those ports be there. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a config map, and this will be the name of the config map. And this config map will be created from this file, myprops.properties. So let's see what is inside this file. So cat myprops.properties. So it has only one key, DB URL and the value. So I deliberately changed the URL to from file content underscore host because I want to see this is a unique value if this value gets populated in the application and if I can retrieve that. So this is the content of the file. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create this config map. So let's see. kubectl create config map, and now instead of saying from file, I say from. This is my props remain same, from env file, from env file equal to, and I give the file name myprops.properties. Oh, it already exists. Okay, kubectl get config maps. Okay, I will say I will do that later. These are two config maps. Let me delete this. kubectl delete config map slash my props. This config map deleted. Now I should be able to create this. So this got created. And you can see this config map kubectl get config map and my arrow ps -o yaml. So you can see this is the data DB URL, whatever I passed from the file. So this gets created. This is the same data which is in the file. Okay. Now my config map got created. The next step is I'm going to create a pod which is going to use this config map, which I just created, my props, and populate this in environment variable. Now on the other side, I have an application which populates the class variable, certain class variable from the value of this environment variable. So I will show you that as well. So let's say, so they have this file k8 config map env from file content. So let me see that k8, this is the file, and you can see that it's using the, so it's same, it's a pod, and this is the name of the pod, and this is a container, and container is taking environment variables from a config map reference, and the name of that reference is myprops, which I just created. Okay, this is what you just saw, right? The my props, correct? So so let's see this. So as the cubes it will create now. Create -f. So this pod got created. Now I can log inside the pod, and I don't have the pod forwarding, so I will log in inside the pod and then try to use kernel wget. And let me see what is inside this pod, how it's coming. So in case you forgot, so this is the DB URL. See, if you see the code, this image, the container has this image, which has this code tips controller. This is a Spring Boot application, as you are aware, and it has a variable called DB URL. And this variable is getting populated from this environment variables value, DB, capital DB underscore capital URL. If it doesn't find any environment variable with this name, then DB underscore URL variable will have the value called default host. So now we will be setting this up. This pod has set this up as an environment variable. So this Spring Boot application should be populating itself, populating this variable from the environment variable value, which is this. So the DB URL was from the properties file. We created a config map using that properties file. So config map is called my props, and we are using that my props in the pod. So my props will have DB underscore URL value, which will get set as an environment variable, and this environment variable will be used by the Spring Boot application to populate this variable inside the controller. Now we have this get method. So tips. So if you see tips, it will pass a DB URL. So if we get this DB URL, it's a tip colon DB URL colon whatever. If we get this, the value of DB URL which we had set here, that means our whole end-to-end flow is working fine. So what I'm going to do is kubectl get ports. It's running. So kubectl execc-it port name -f bash. So I'm inside this. So let's see curl localhost colon 8080/tips. So this was the path, URL path. So this is the value which I got, and this was the value which I set into in the file also, correct? So maybe this is a file, correct? So it got populated by the Kubernetes into the application. The come out of this, let's see the subsequent steps. This is just an explanation. I will just reiterate one more time. My props.properties as below one line as content, which I just saw. So a config map with the name my props is created. Now, while creating the config map, from env file option is used to create to use this file. It will put DB URL as environment variable, which Spring Boot app will inject. Spring Boot app will inject into this controller variable, correct? Config map, the contents created can be checked with, which we did. And we can see cubes, it will describe pods, and we can see the pod, and it shows the environment variable from this config map, and that I will leave it up to you to run this command and check it out. And as I showed you, environment variables will be applied. This is the environment variable. It will be injected into this variable, and this variable will be returned as part of this get call /tips get call. Now the next step, config map as file via config map volume. This is another way of passing the configuration. So config map volume helps exposing config file to container. So read this. It exposes config file to container. The volume will expose each entry of config map as file. If config map has 10 entries, then how many files will be created? 10. Container application can read the file and get the config values, right? Because each config map entry is coming as a config file, as a file. So container can read that, the application can read that and populate its variables. It is generally used for large config data, and we'll see example of that. So config map as file via config map volume example. This is an example. So what will happen is a config map will have its data appear as directory inside a create container. So we'll create a config map first. So there is a YAML file which I have created. So I will show you that. Cat my config map YAML. So this is the YAML file. So it creates a config map. This is the name of the config map, custom config. It has these key values: DB URL, the system URL, debug value, max connection, output directory, Kafka topic, just some random key value pairs I have put here. Now coming back here, so I will create this kubectl apply -f. I could use create also, apply also, doesn't matter. Kubectl apply -f, then my config YAML. So it got created. Now create a pod using above config map. So we are going to create pod using this YAML. So this is the name of the pod. And here, if you see in the containers, there is a volumes, and volume name is my config. And this volume is getting populated from config map, and the config map name is custom config, which we just created here, right? This is the name of the config. So we give this name and use that to have a volume inside pod, and the volume name is my config. Now this volume is mounted. So there's a volume mount. It's mounted. This my config. So this name is same as this name. So which means this volume is getting mounted inside the pod and is getting mounted in this directory /etc/my config directory. So this is a file. This definition is in this file create config map entries. Let's see that. Cat create config m small entries as file in one volume .yaml. So this is the file. This is exactly what I showed you. Now I'll create this. Help me copy paste. Oh, I don't need to copy paste. I can run this command and change cat to kubectl create -f. So this pod got created. If I say kubectl get pods, this is another pod. So I can log into this pod kubectl exe -it -bash. So I'm inside that pod. Now, as I said, it will create, it will mount this volume. So let's check that. And what I said is it will mount under etc config directory. So let's check that. ls/etc. What's the name? My config directory. My config dir. So it has created that. Now you see each value which I had given in the config map, it gets created as a file. Correct? DB URL, another system URL. So you will see DB URL is file, another system URL is a file. Let's check what is in DB URL. DB URL, why it's not showing? Oh, I am not inside the directory. First, I have to cd to the directory. See this DB URL. It is showing the value here from another whatever, which I had created here from file, another system file, right? So sorry, from config file URL. From config file URL. This is what it shows. Now, if I take any other random, let's say I say output directory, I cat the output directory. I say cat output dir. It will have the value my output dir from file, which is what I had populated here. My to dir from file. So it created that. It created those. It created under the mount of directory. It created many files. On each file, name is same as the config map key, and the content, the file has only one line. and that one line is that one line has the same value as is the config map value for that particular key. So this is about exposing the, now your application can read from this directory, and for each file each file name is the key name of the config map, and the value content of the file is the value of that config map value, config map key value. So your application can read it from this directory for each configuration. Now, if you want to expose only few key values, we don't want to have all the key values which have populated into this config map, for example. So in this config, where did the config map go? Here, I want to expose only few key values. So how to do that? So so there is so what we are going to do is it's the same pod, similar thing. So you are going to have volume and volume mounts. Only thing which you are going to do is you are going to mention the items here in the volumes, that I want to expose only DB URL and debug value. I don't want to expose any other config map entry in the volume. So let's see that also. So this is file few keys. So I will show you that. Let me exit out of this pod first. So one volume, and what's the name of the file? Underscore few keys. Few keys. Oh, not create. I should use get first. So this is where the items, only these two items will be created in the directory, in the volume in this directory, etc my config here. So what I'm going to say, try to create this A. So let's port. So I have to delete this port. I have given the same port apparently here also. So kubectl delete port, and I'll deleted that. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this, and it got created. So I'm going to log into the port kubectl exec. So I am going to log in, and I'm going to check for cd/etc my config dir, and I say ls. It's only the two config map entries. The config map is the key value pair. The key for each entry becomes a file name. The value for that particular key is the content inside that file. For example, get this, get this. So you can see the first DB URL this value, debug value file name is info, right? So that's the way you can expose only few key values here. Now, if you, so some question, you might ask this question: what will happen if the volume is mounted at etc directory? Etc directory is already existing. So if you do that, if you don't give etc/my config dir, you just mount it at etc, then whatever is there in the etc folder, it will become inaccessible. And whatever you will mount under etc, that only that will be accessible. You don't want to do that because etc has many important files and the subfolders also. What if you want to see older than new data? Mount as a file subpath is the key. So there is another way. So what another way is, see, you are taking the custom config, so there is no problem here. So during volume mounts, you can have the same my config, and the mount path you can give this /etc my config dir and my file.conf, and the subpath is debug value. So what would happen is, so it will be mounted as this file, and the subpath is the value of this key, which the debug value here. The subpath is a key, right? The config map key. So debug value is the key in the config map. So the value of the debug value will be set in the mount path file. We'll see example of this. So what I'm going to do is, do I need to delete? No, I don't need to delete pod. So I need to create this pod. And what is the file name? What is the file, the YAML file name? Files in volume. Let's check that. Let's exit out of it. I forgot the file name. So what I want to check is files in volume, files in UL. Okay. As one file volume, permissions, will do this later. As which one is this? Okay, let me check one thing. Subpath, let me grab for subpath instead of this. Sub and P is capital. Okay. This is the file which I want to run. So cat k8 hyphen config map entries as one config file.yaml. So this is the subpath, which will the debug value. The value of this key in the config map will be populated in the file. So let's run that. Okay, I think I need to delete the ports. So kubectl get pod. We should have given the different name for each YAML, but nevertheless, kubectl delete pod. Done. Now kubectl create -f. It got created. Now let's see the pod. ctl get pod. This is the pod. kubectl. It's this is the pod which got created. So I will go inside this pod. kubectl exec. I think this is the pod. Now I go into etc. What is the directory name here? etc myconfig. etc my. So now let's see what is there in this file. You see the file inside this is only one value, which is info. So that is another way to populate the configuration inside the Kubernetes image. And this is what I showed. The last step is the volume file permissions. Files in config map volumes are given default permission, which is 644. 644 is read, write, read, and read. You can change the permission. It can be changed by default mode properties in the volume. And we'll see example of that, right? So remember, the 644 is read, write, and 4 is read, and 4 is read. So what we are going to, let's see this file config map entries. I think this is what we saw as one conf file. Let's check that one more time. Cat config map entries as one conf file. So it is already got created, and we were already inside that. If you see this was the permission. Actually, we should have seen that permission inside this, but anyway, let's see. 1 minute. Let's go inside this again. kubectl exec. Let's go and go inside etc myconfig dir, and this file will have ls-ltr. This is the permission it has, right? Now what we are going to do is we are going to have another YAML file. Before I delete this pod, let me show you another YAML file, and this YAML file is create config map entries, and then okay, as fun config confile hyphen file permissions, correct? So it is same as the previous YAML file, pod YAML file I showed you. The only thing is we are changing the default mode in the volumes. We are changing the default mode to 044. So instead of becoming 644, which was the default thing. Now it will become 044, and we'll see that. But before that, I think I have given the same pod name. So I have to delete that pod, cube, ctl, delete, it got deleted. Now I'm going to create it, cube ctl, create -f. Okay, spelling was wrong. Cube ctl create -f. This got created. Now I will go inside this cube ctl exec. Go inside this etc my config directory. Use the difference. It had read it earlier, it had now only write, because we give the default mode as 444. Right? So that's how you can change the file permissions. And this is what I showed you, correct? So I'll pause it here. Next time in the next session, we'll cover, how to update the configs and, and update config, various ways of updating the config, and then we'll move to secrets also. So thank you very much. We'll meet in the next session.